Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Spyweaver here with True Spy Gaming, coming at you once again with another Retribution Paladin guide. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good in-between time for those of you burning the midnight oil and like 3 a.m. for whatever reason watching this. Got my cup of coffee here, ready to go ahead and give you all the lowdowns on what's coming up for you. This guide is going to encompass the last list of changes that Blizzard has given us for the 7.1.5 patch that is dropping soon, or has already dropped depending on when you're watching this. Gonna encompass it all. We're gonna go over the secondary stat changes, the legendary changes, we're gonna go over the talent changes, and then I'm gonna put a little bit of a tidbit at the end about the 2 and 4 piece for the Retribution Paladin. So without further ado, go ahead, grab yourself a cup of coffee, sit down, strap in, and we're gonna make this one quite enjoyable. Give you some prio lists, give you an idea what to do in 7.1.5. We're gonna continue making you one of the best Retribution Paladins out there, folks. Stay tuned. Alrighty, so let's just jump right on into it. I'm going to start with the class-specific Retribution Paladin changes. Then we're going to move on to some other areas that I feel is going to be important enough to cover in this update guide. Starting off, the biggest one that you are going to see as a Retribution Paladin. Greater Blessing of Might has now been removed. Gone. Kaput. Goodbye. No longer having to worry about your number 5 damaging ability being constrained by that idiot fucking Shadow Priest surrendering early and then dying, or that other stupid Demon Hunter jumping off the Cenarius platform. Right now, that is off the table. What they're doing instead, giving us a 12% buff across the board. Essentially, they're, in a sense, bringing back Sword of Light, a modifier ability that's giving us 12% increased value to the following spells: Crusader Strike, Judgment, Justicar's Vengeance, Eye for an Eye, Zeal, Consecration, Consecration is still going to suck, Templar's Verdict, Divine Storm, Blade of Justice, and Wake of Ashes. So you can see, across the board, 12% increase to all that. I kind of think this is a good way to compensate for that loss of Greater Blessing of Might. I figured as soon as I heard them talking about that they're going to remove it, that they need to do a flat damage increase across the board. For the main fact that Greater Blessing of Might, some fights I can get it to be 8% of my damage done, other fights it's 15%. I just didn't know what percentage that they were going to decide to land on. I'm kind of glad they went to the higher end and went with the 12 instead of the lower end and maybe gone with an 8 or something. This then is kind of twofold. Right now what it's doing, it's taking your current 7.1 live values, multiplying it by 12%, and that's going to be your 7.1.5 values. Now that gives us a new baseline there, which then is also increased further by artifact traits, by Crusade, by Legendary Cape, and in 7.1.5 the Legendary Belt. I'll get to that later. So this really isn't just a flat 12% damage increase. If you want to get into the arithmetic of it all, it's actually going to be a little bit more. I just did some basic plain napkin math when I heard that they were going to bring this out, when they saw that they put this out in the PTR and that it was going to be a 12% increase, and found out that it is actually doing roughly 5% more damage overall than the current live Greater Blessing of Might. That is actually a significant change, even though, and once again I'll get to this later, they're changing some legendaries up. They're actually giving one of the strongest classes in the game right now, if you ask me personally, an even stronger buff to be more ridiculous. Now that's all fine and dandy, but personally I think it might lead to a nerf later on down the line, so I'm surprised it has made it this far in the PTR builds without getting knocked down. Could be potentially be because the legendaries are adjusting down for us. Not entirely sure, but another interesting little tidbit with that is that they have adjusted the Retribution Paladin 4 set and actually buffed it. So I'm kind of interested to see where they're going with this, because now we're going to be a pure straight damage class, no longer reliant on anybody else, except for the Retribution aura. But you're only going to try to cheese that when you're, after you've probably cleared Mythic and then you're going back for parses. But hey, who doesn't like to do that? That's kind of fun. Have somebody die off the bat for your wings, have somebody die 2 minutes in for your wings, and hello, high parse. But that's aside from the point. But they're essentially making us a pure straight DPS class, only reliant on yourself, no longer have to rely on this Greater Blessing of Might. Their concept behind this, their reasoning behind getting rid of this, is that it just wasn't working as they intended. They thought people were getting a little salty if they didn't get the Blessing of Might, and then that the Paladins, even though they get the damage, everybody else is still getting salty, and then the Paladins probably weren't getting the best benefit from it. I don't know. Either way, they're actually buffing us by getting rid of Greater Blessing of Might. Thank God, no longer have to cuss out the Demon Hunter as he jumps off the platform during Mythic Scenarios. And yes, anybody who's done it knows that frickin' happens way too often, more than it should, especially on pole. But that's a story for another time. Going down the line then, there's other talents as well that are being changed. Divine Hammers, getting a buff here. Divine Hammers now spin around you, damaging enemies within 8 yards for 90% holy damage instantly and every 2 seconds for 12 seconds. So that's 6 hits, generates 2 holy power. Current live 7.1 is 45%. It is now 90% in 7.1.5. So that is getting doubled. Whether or not this is going to make it pull ahead in single target situations is yet to be shown. It potentially might later on down the line when you get your tier 19 4-piece bonus. For the main fact that also generates additional holy power for us. If we got things like the ring generating our holy power and our 4-piece bonus generating our holy power, we can take slower talents that hit harder, as evidenced by the fact that you favor Zeal over Fires of Justice as soon as you get the legendary ring. You're able to take that slower talent that hits harder because you have an additional holy power generator going on in the background, so you don't really lose out on Templar's Verdict Strikes. Next talent being changed, Divine Intervention. Reduces your Divine Shield cooldown by 20%. Sadly, we can't bubble that much anymore. In addition, any attack which would kill you instead reduces you to 20% of your maximum health and triggers Divine Shield. Cannot occur while it is on cooldown or Forbearance is active. Only change here is changing the cooldown from a reduction of 50% to a reduction of 20%. So in essence, they're increasing the time it takes for this to proc. I'm not quite that in favor of it. I liked the 50% cooldown because it was very handy on certain fights. Il'gynoth when people screw up on Bloods. I mean, Cenarius when the rogue didn't want to go clear and the hunters were stupid and you had to go clear. But it's aside from the point. I'm almost thinking they're changing that for more of a PvP aspect, not PvE. Very logical and very possible. Next talent, they're actually listening to us on this one here. Execution Sentence getting a buff. Hammer slowly falls from the sky, dealing X amount of attack power holy damage after 7 seconds. It is getting buffed from 1100% to 1700%. Still not going to be enough to overtake Final Verdict, simply because for the fact that Templar's Verdict is also buffed through the Ashbringer, and then multiplicative of that during our Crusade. Granted, yes, you should logically be able to get 2 Templar's Verdicts off during 1 execution sentence. However, 3 Templar's Verdicts still, the 3 to 4 Templar's Verdicts still is stronger than an execution sentence. It's just not quite where it's at. It could be close later gear levels, but around the 885, 890 area that most of us should be sitting at this point if you've been lucky enough to have the RNG gods bless you. It's still not quite enough. But stay tuned on this because I have a feeling a little more tweaks are going to be coming. I have a feeling near end tier gear levels, this might come into play. Also, do note if you're going to be using Execution Sentence, the damage happens when the hammer hits your target, so the damage happens after the 7 seconds. Make sure your Judgment debuff is up as the hammer hits. That's how you get the most out of your Execution Sentence. That means you can start off a fight by firing off Execution Sentence now, build up some Holy Power, hit off your Judgment, hit your Templar's Verdict, boom, Execution Sentence should land, and it really should be no different. In essence, somewhat going back to the playstyle of Warlords of Draenor, except you kind of have to watch how you're firing Execution Sentence off. It's not just another talent or another damaging ability we get. New wording or work for Fist of Justice here. Fist of Justice in 7.1 was Judgment reduces the remaining cooldown of Hammer of Justice by 10 seconds. Fist of Justice now, each Holy Power spent reduces the remaining cooldown of HOJ by 2.5 seconds. That being said, in essence, it's doing the same thing, but it's hinging it on Holy Power spent instead of a Judgment cast. Fair enough, I can see where this would come into play for PvP aspect again as well, and it might actually be more beneficial, especially if you're trying to run Crusade in PvP, or even if you're running, DP, firing off a Jesus Christ Vengeance every time the DP procs. It's going to benefit you more. It's a potential that it can make our HOJ come off cooldown a lot faster. Holy Wrath also getting changed, still does deal 200% of your missing health and holy damage up to 4 nearby enemies, up to 120% of your maximum health, but it now only deals 35% of missing health against enemy players, down from 50%. Probably thought it was too chunky in PvP. Once again, I feel this is more of a PvP change, not going to really affect the PvE side of things. Seal of Light has been removed. No longer will you need to infuse yourself with holy energy, increasing your movement speed by 20%, last 20 seconds per holy power spent. That is gone, now replaced by Judgment of Light. Judgment now applies Judgment of Light to the target, causing the next 40 successful attacks against the target to heal the attacker for 20% of your spell power. The effect can only occur once per 1 second on each target. So in essence, they're giving Retribution Paladins another heal per se. But still know if you're going to want to take that over Divine Intervention or your 2-horse charges. It's still not going to overtake in that level 90 tier. And Word of Glory also got a buff up from 900% of spell power to 1200% of spell power. Maximum 2 charges, heal yourself and up to 5 friendly targets within 15 yards. A conical heal, 15-yard diameter, or radius, excuse me. Had to take a sip of coffee to make myself think a little bit smarter there. But it is being buffed. Personally, I'm not sure how many Retribution Paladins are even bothering spending Holy Power on this. I can see its benefit during progression. But consequently, on the same side, I can also see the benefit of taking the talents that give you more DPS instead of wasting Holy Power during progression, because more DPS also eases the burden on tanks for tank debuffs, healers for the mana, etc., etc. Moving on, down to the specialization itself. These are the baseline abilities getting changed. Avenging Wrath increases all damage done by 35% and all healing done by 35% for 20 seconds. Essentially, it's just a tooltip update used to read increases all damage and healing you deal by 35%. So, in essence, they just reworded it. Not really any changes there. Greater Blessing of Kings gets a little bit of a buff here, though, however. Places a blessing on an ally that grants them an absorption shield, absorbs up to 2.7 times spell power damage, and will be refreshed to full strength every 6 seconds, even if fully consumed. Limit 1. So they're getting rid of Might, but they're buffing the other Greater Blessings, because as well, Greater Blessing of Wisdom places a blessing on an ally that causes them to regenerate 1% of maximum health and mana per 10 seconds, limit 1. It used to be per 15 seconds. Alright, so per 10 seconds you get 1% of your maximum health and mana back, 6 times a minute. 5-minute fights, 30 times a fight. If you want to just baseline it, you can say that's 30% mana. It could be significant, but it's not going to baseline out to be 30% in essence. It's going to be like probably more like 10%. I mean, it might be more beneficial now. However, since we're not losing DPS by putting out Greater Blessing of Wisdom now at this point because Might is gone and off the table, there's no reason that you don't put Blessing of Kings on one tank and Blessing of Wisdom on one of the healers, and then correspond with the other paladins to determine, okay, you're going to Kings that guy and Wisdom that guy, I'm going to do Kings here and Wisdom here. Essentially, I could almost see the Pally Power add-on from Wrath come back for this one, so you can see who you're placing these blessings on, who's going to do what, who's doing what where, and what you need to do correspondingly, who you need to watch with your blessings. Shield of Vengeance as well is getting a tooltip update, basically just correcting the damage. It used to show damage of attack power times 10, but now it is actually attack power times 20, so it's just getting straight up a tooltip update here. Creating the barrier of Holy Light that absorbs X amount of damage for 15 seconds. When it's consumed, all damage absorbed is dealt as holy damage and divided across all enemies within 8 yards. Like I said, once again, it's just fixing a tooltip error. It's not changing the amount of damage it does because it's always done more damage than it shows. They're just finally fixing their faux pas. And if you really care about it, Honor Talent getting a change as well here. Blessing of Sanctuary, the cooldown is changed from 25 seconds to 30 seconds. Instantly removing all stun, silence, and fear and horror effects from the friendly target and reduces the duration of future such effects by 60 seconds for 5 seconds. So that's basically getting a little bit of a nerf, probably to compensate for the other PvP changes found in the talent tree. But that is it for the talent and specialization specific changes for the Retribution Paladin. Next section here we're going to get into is going to be talking about the legendaries and how they're changing, as well as the new legendaries coming out, and we're going to look at a new legendary prio list. Stay tuned, folks. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look into the new legendaries introduced in 7.1.5. Paladin specifically is getting 3 that only the Paladin can have, however only one of those applies to the Retribution spec. So our new Retribution specific legendary are shoulders named Ashes to Dust, taking the look of an old Firelands piece of gear. Shoulders there. It gives you 1786 strength, 2680 stamina, 735 crit, 551 haste. So they did that again as well. Crit over haste, giving us what we want. Maybe they're finally starting to realize that Mastery sucks ass, or maybe they're feeling sorry for us for the fact that every single piece of freaking tier gear they're giving us has way more mastery than we're ever going to want. However, we're still going to take it because the 4-piece is pretty astounding at this point. The special effect of the Ashes to Dust shoulders: enemies hit by your Wake of Ashes take 15% increased damage from you for 6 seconds. Not bad, not the greatest, because it's not going to be a higher uptime than your ring, than the Reformed Belt, which we'll talk about later, than the Cape, and potentially the other new one that they're introducing. However, it is still going to be a damage increase over some of the other legendaries, so it is going to kind of shuffle things around here a little bit. Since it only buffs after you hit an enemy by Wake of Ashes, in an AoE situation, this might be something that you're going to want to take, because everything that your Wake of Ashes hits is now taking 15% increased damage for 6 seconds, so you should legitimately be able to get off 2 Divine Storms. And the more targets you have, the more damage it's going to deal. It's probably just going to chunk in large AoE situations. Think Heroic Il'gynoth, when you just say fuck it and jump all the Bloods together and just want to AoE them down, or even Mythic Il'gynoth on the first one where you just AoE all the Bloods down right away off the top and pop away healing cooldowns, but that's beside the point. This, I can only see being putting itself ahead in strict AoE situations with a lot of adds continually, where every single time your Wake of Ashes is off cooldown, you can hit multiple targets. Otherwise, it's not going to vault itself above the other legendaries. The other new one being introduced specifically for DPS, they're introducing 3 trinkets, a tank, a DPS, and a healing. The DPS specific one, entitled Kill Jaden's Burning Wish, gives you 2264 strength, 408 crit, 408 haste, 408 mastery. It is a freaking beast stat stick, in a sense, with a pretty good proc, if you ask me. Launch a vortex of destruction that seeks your current enemy. When it reaches the target, it explodes, dealing a critical strike to all enemies within 10 yards for a pre-calculated amount of fire damage. Cooldown of 1 minute 15 seconds. You might think that's a kind of an odd amount, an odd number for a cooldown, 1 minute 15. However, if you think about it, over a 5-minute fight, you'll only be able to cast it 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I'm doing that right. Either way, during a 4-minute fight, you're only going to be able to cast it about 3 times. So yeah, I was kind of doing that wrong, I believe. I know. They're basically restricting the amount of times you can cast it. It's not going to be cast on the minute every minute. It's going to be cast, minute 15. Something that you're going to want to track with a weak aura as well. I will definitely include this in an upcoming weak aura pack that I put out. Since with 715, I'm going to have to adjust everything around. Definitely can get rid of the Greater Blessing of Might tracker because that's gone, thank God. And then this will probably get added in since, I do have the Faulty Countermeasure tracker. This may as well get added into it as well. But essentially it is a trinket that is a pretty nice stat stick giving us crit and haste. I wish it didn't give us mastery. I wish it would give us versatility. But not too much more you can ask for. The 408 crit and the 408 haste and 408 mastery is going to equate to 1% of each. So not too bad there. I'm giving us a nice damaging cooldown as well. The damage actually does a fairly large amount, but it's not going to place itself ahead of our 2 current best in live. But yet it's still going to be a decent legendary that you're going to want. Since it does deal the critical strike, that does help us out. It deals it to all enemies within 10 yards of the explosion. So this is going to be another AoE legendary. So we might get into the specific areas or the situation once again where we're changing now legendaries based on the fight or the situation, since we're getting legendaries that are basically buffing up our AoE damage. Now for the specific changes to our current legendaries. Paladin specific here, Justice Gaze being changed. Hammer of Justice now deals 600% holy damage and has a 75% reduced cooldown when used against an enemy above 75% health. That is buffed up from 350% holy damage. Still not enough to put it above even the new trinket. Just because it is a reverse cleave after that first chunk of the boss's health, it's useless. It does nothing. You're no longer using Hammer of Justice because it doesn't give you any damage. Pretty good for PvP in a sense right off the bat, but that's about it. Lairdun's Fury Unleashed. Unfortunately, this one is getting nerfed. It's getting tuned down a little bit. While Avenging Wrath is active, you gain a holy power every 4 seconds. That's down from 2.5. Still isn't going to be enough to make or break it or change its place in the prio. It is still going to be behind the cape, which is also getting nerfed. Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm increase the damage of your next Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm within 4 seconds by 15% instead of 25%. However, the one that every paladin is going to be lusting after now is the Chain of Thrawn. The belt has a new effect now. Avenging Wrath increases all healing done by an additional 25%, and Holy Prot and Right get an additional 50% buff to their healing, and increases damage done by an additional 20%. The old effect was that casting non-greater blessing heals and heal the target for 50% of maximum health. Essentially now it is increasing your healing and damage in Holy Wrath by another decent chunk. The 20% increase in damage during Holy Wrath, this is actually tuned down from what they previously introduced it at in the PTR, is actually better than the current 7.1 cape at the 25% increase during Templar's Verdict Divine Storm, just because it is it is increasing the end load on our wings, and this 20%, if you think about it this way, actually goes into effect as soon as you cast Crusade or Avenging Wrath. Once you cast that, it increases that base damage by the 20%, and then the Crusade stacks on top of that also increase the initial base damage that is multiplied by the belt damage. That all then gets multiplied by your Crusade stacks. That is why this belt is now better than the current live 7.1 cape that is at 25%. This is going to make us burst like a freaking freight train. We burst like a truck right now as it is, but we're going to burst like a freaking freight train once the Chain of Thrawn goes live in 7.1.5. Those are the new legendaries. Those are the changes. That is going to change our prio around to the legendaries that we are going to want. With the addition of the new ones, with the change of the old ones, it's going to kind of look like something like this. First one you're going to want to use, if you're lucky enough, is the Chain of Thrawn. Fairly straightforward. It increases your Avenging Wrath damage by an additional 20%. That is freaking amazing. Next is going to be your legendary cape, the Whisper of the Nazarethum. Simply fact, it's something that happens throughout the whole fight, still continually, as long as you can keep that buff up. It is also increasing your Templar's Verdict's hits during that Crusade by that 15%, which that coupled with the Chain of Thrawn is going to be, oh my god, like I said, a freight train with about 250 full cars of coal. It is going to be unstoppable. Let's just put it that way. It is going to, we are going to see bursts like none other. Right now, I already see myself bursting around 1.3 mil on my meters, sometimes up to 1.5. I wouldn't be surprised by the end of Nighthold with these two legendaries that we'd be bursting around 3 mil DPS, honestly. It is going to be insane. However, it is going to, our peaks are going to be higher because of this change. Our values are probably going to be lower because of the nerf to the cape. But anyways, after that, third will be Lyrdan's Fury Unleashed. Avenging Wrath is active. You gain a free holy power every 4 seconds. Once again, it's a free holy power generator. So for every 1.5 zeals you get off, essentially, still, you get a free holy power. Not bad, and I'm kind of glad they're slowing it down, actually. Especially with the changes to the 4-piece for Retribution Paladins. And for the fact that right now, currently, you almost overspend holy power. Then after the ring, we'll be bringing in the legendary trinket, kill Jaden's Burning Wish, and after that, Ashes to Dust. The only reason Ashes to Dust falls kind of that low is because I'm kind of going from a single target mindset here, giving these ideas to you. And Ashes to Dust will only proc for you 6 seconds every minute, essentially, every time you use Wake of Ashes. If you're able to plan it right, where you fire off a Wake of Ashes, hit Templar's Verdict, and, you should be able to sneak 3 in during that. Wake of Ashes, because that'll give you 5 holy power, hit a Templar's Verdict immediately. That's 1 second, another second for hitting a Blade of Wrath, but it back up to 2, so you'll be back up to 4. Third second, you'll be hitting Templar's Verdict. 4th and 5th seconds, you're building 2 more holy power, and the 6th second, you're getting off Templar's Verdict. So you might be able to get 3 Templar's Verdicts off during it, but it's going to be fairly close, and it's only going to happen once every single time your Wake of Ashes is off cooldown. That's why I'm saying it'll be more useless in an AoE useful in an AoE situation where you hit Wake of Ashes on a ton of enemies, then fire out a Divine Storm. But that's the legendary changes coming up here in 7.1.5, how they're going to look and how you're going to want to use them. Next, we're going to take a little bit of a look into the secondary stat changes because those are changing as well, just how they're calculating them. I might talk a little bit here about the changes to the 4-piece and how that's going to look. And that'll be it. Stay tuned, we're almost there, folks. Alrighty, the last big big position and last big thing I want to touch on here in this 7.1.5 guide for you is that of the changes to secondary stats coming in this next patch. Blizzard is kind of going to change how much of each stat equates to a percent, essentially. They're changing their equations. Basically, what they're trying to do is force you to take a higher item level gear over a lower item level piece, just because the item level is higher. Essentially, no longer will we be doing kind of what I've been doing, sitting on an 865 chest because it's got crit over haste, and thus ends up being better than an 885 chest. It's got something like mastery over haste. Essentially, their new calculations, a new way of changing things, will decrease the amount of current secondary stats we have, as well as putting more of an emphasis on main stat. So they think by decreasing the amount of our secondary stat, we're going to want more main stat. It might work out this way, it might not, but I also do see a 0.2 secondary stat crunch, just for the main fact that even on my Shaman in 880 gear for Resto, I was already well over 100% mastery. It was kind of insane. Same with an Enhance. I feel this is their way of just trying to tone things down early enough before we hit endgame or end X pack, but they're not in essence quite saying it. They're trying to basically mask the fact that their calculations sucked ass in the beginning, and now they're trying to fix it before it gets to endgame problems. Essentially, they're trying to claim that they want to just increase item level as a guideline for upgrading items, not your stat priorities or choices. So what they're kind of doing is changing around how much of a number you need for a percent. It's going to look something like this. Critical Strike, you're going to need 400 crit for 1%, which is up from the current 350. Haste, you're going to need 375 for 1%, up from 325. Mastery, you'll need 400 for 1%, up from the 350. And Versatility, 475 is needed for 1% damage and healing increase, up from 400. 950 is needed for 1% damage and healing reduction, up from 800. So essentially, Versatility they're changing by 75, and the rest they're basically changing by 50. Essentially, it's a stats crunch without saying it's a stats crunch. Let's just call, apples, apples, oranges, oranges. The next big thing they wanted to address were rings and necks. With the removal of secondary stats, you might have been in a situation, once again like I was for the longest time, running an 825 blue neck with the socket because it's got a lot of crit over your haste, plus the socket so you can add things in, so it's another 150 stat. And it didn't matter how many goddamn 870s that you had drop, that freaking 825 was still better than the 870s. Thank God I ended up getting an 890 at some point in time that had the same stats and also more of those woeful stats, including, even once you absorb the socket. But what they're going to do is give rings and necks more secondary stats, and essentially. Straight from a blue post from Blizzard here, their second goal of this is that improving rings and necks. The removal of primary stats from these slots on Legion gear means that your choices of secondary stats therefore are impactful, which they wanted. However, they still suffer from the problem of secondary stat distribution dominating the choice of which to equip. They've increased how heavily the item level affects the amount of stats on rings and necks in 7.1.5, which makes significant item level jumps a clearer indicator of an upgrade on these slots. Then they go on to admit that you'll still find situations in which secondary stat choice is more important than item level for rings and necks, which is intentional. They're just dialing that back. So now, instead of running that 825 with the socket over the 870s, perhaps the way they're redoing and increasing the jump, or the exponential jump from, say, an 825 to an 830 to an 840, it's going to be more of an exponential curve. Perhaps with that change, the 870s will be better regardless of the stats. I think that is what they're going for. It kind of sounds like it. I think they're just trying to veil the fact that they screwed up and they don't want to admit it, but that's my personal opinion on the matter. Essentially, they're also going to change the combat rating multipliers. If you look at these values, you can see that jewelry multiplier decays at a slower rate than those for armor and trinkets. Thus, each item level point leads to a greater stat percentage gain on jewelry and armor. Once again, straight from the blue post, don't lower player power. That's their third goal. A key part of overall strategy, it isn't yet complete. Right now in the PTR as it is, the player power is definitely down a few percent compared to live. Next build will have changes that increase the total amount of stats given by all items above 800 to account for the gap, such that the overall power of your equipped items should be about the same, if not slightly higher than it is currently 715. So they're going to increase the total stats on these gear, so we don't in essence feel this change. They're just going to basically put us where we're at and then increase the amount that we need in the future. So basically they're going to reformulate lower eye level gear and keep the higher level gear the same as how I'm feeling it. So going to state, you might expect these changes will affect some classes more strongly than others. More overall character power will come from your primary stat than it did before, so all your abilities will hit harder even if they crit less or happen less frequently. So basically, they're giving us more secondary stat on current items. Greatest example would be some shoulders from Xavius. Before they announced this and put this in the PTR, these shoulders would give you 1119 agi or intellect, 1678 stamina, 370 crit, 333 haste, 333 mastery. That equated to 0.93% of a crit percentage, 0.89% of haste, and 0.83% of mastery. After they changed this now, the shoulders give 1174 agi or intellect, 1761 stamina, 388 crit, 349 haste, 349 mastery. So crit is up on this piece from 0.93 to 0.97, haste is up from 0.89 to 0.93, and mastery is up from 0.83 to 0.87, especially using their new calculations. So essentially they're trying to accommodate for this change with their current gear so it's not immediately felt, it'll be felt later on. Once again, I think changing the secondary stats is their way of saying we screwed up, our calculations sucked in the beginning, so we're going to change it going forward, and we're going to try to mask it and say we're just trying to help things out later down the line. So that's how the secondary stat changes currently look. The last piece I want to touch on is the 2-piece and 4-piece bonuses before finishing this up. Our new current Retribution Paladin 2-piece, Holy Power attack damage is increased by 10%, so any spenders, their damage is increased by 10% once you get your 2-piece. Pretty good buff to Templar's Verdict. It's going to be nice and synergize nice there with Crusade, increasing our burst a lot more. Like I said, we're going to hit like a freaking unstoppable freight train with 250 cars loaded with coal. Goddamn heavy, hard to stop if you know inertia and physics, and I took too many science classes in college growing up. Our new 4-piece, the way it is sitting now, Holy Power generators have a 20% chance to generate an additional Holy Power. This might change our playstyle around a little bit with the Blade of Wrath. Might want to be a little tentative about popping that off when we're sitting at 3 Holy Power. Before we hit the Templar's Verdict, it might change us to the fact that you're at 3 Holy Power, hit a Templar's Verdict, then hit your Blade of Wrath, because you could potentially shot back up to 3 Holy Power, because then you're wasting less Holy Power. But it is also going to be intricate on how you use this when you're using the Legendary Ring during Crusade, if you still have it at this point. You might want to be careful, because you are definitely going to run into the chance that you might flood yourself on Holy Power. That we'll look into at a later guide when I get into some N-tier rating guides here with Nighthold. Plan on getting those out for you, but that is how the 2-piece and 4-piece looks. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That looks to be all that is changing with the Retribution Paladin currently in 7.1.5. Who knows how long this is going to stay current? Blizzard could change things next week. They could change it 2 months down the line. They could change it whenever they feel like. But if that ever happens, you can count on it. I'll get another guide out there. Thanks again for watching. Go ahead, if this helped you out in any ways, like, comment, share below. Let me know what you're doing. Give me a subscribe. Watch out for some future videos. If you'd like to see me put any of this into action for myself, go ahead and join me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Spyweaver. As you saw my dog kind of walking the screen there, he wanted a little bit of showtime. I stream Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays on a regular schedule. You can find that on there, as well as Saturday and Sunday. That's when I'm going to be on my alt, just messing around, but who doesn't like doing that? Go ahead and follow me on Twitter as well at TrueSpyGaming. That's when you get the most up-to-date updates on whether I'm going to be coming out with some new videos. Got any comments, questions, concerns? Either you can leave them below, drop me a direct message. You'll find my week aura set below as well. Definitely going to be updating that to 7.1.5 and getting some new ones on there. If there's anything specific that you'd like changed about those week auras, go ahead and feel free to drop me a message and let me know what you want to do, and I'll go ahead and do that as well. And any suggestions for future comments, future content, go ahead and give those my way as well. I'll probably take a look at it, ponder it for a few moments, sit down at work, bored like, decide how I'm going to do it, come home the next day, do it, and put it out for you. But anyways, once again, this is Spyweaver here with TrueSpyGaming signing off. Until I either see you on the stream or the next video, stay frosty, my friends, and continue being the greatest Retribution Paladins out there.